Well, we have finished another week, and we are going to look back over episodes 64 through 70 and try to kind of summarize what will mostly be the book of Judges, with the exception of also adding Ruth in there. So let's begin with episode 64, which actually started us in Judges 17 through 18. So the thing about Judges 17 through 18 was that this is really where the book of Judges probably begins. Remember, this is the people of Dan, and the Danites have not as of yet found their inheritance. They haven't actually received their land yet, or they have, but they lost it, as we saw back in the book of Joshua. And so the Danites, remember, there's this whole thing of the Levite priest who's working for Micah, and Micah and his mother are worshiping idols, and now the Levite priest is being a priest of idols and false gods. And then the Danites come. They take this priest, this Levitical priest, and they ask him to be a priest over their whole tribe. And then we see a couple of times like this statement in chapter 18, verse 1, there was no king in Israel. This is the time when everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. Everybody was doing what they wanted to be doing. This is really prior to the judges coming on the scene, because the people are being wicked. And so the people of Dan come and they find this Levite priest. They take him away from Micah's house. They ask him to come and be a priest to them. And then one of the things that we noticed, if we came down here, is that the genealogy, some of your translations will say that this priest was Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. Some of your translations will say that. And some will say Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, which is more likely according to the Hebrew text and according to some debate. But it's one of those things that probably it was changed later to Manasseh, as we talked about, for the Jews to avoid kind of anything disparaging against one of Moses' descendants. But this is very early on. This is at the very beginning of the book of Judges, right at the end of the book of Joshua. And it's really important for our timeline that we keep that in mind. It's also interesting to remember that the Danites are not included in the 144,000, the 12,000 from each tribe of Israel in the book of Revelation. Judges 19 through 21 then dealt with, this is still, chronologically speaking, this is still at the beginning of the book of Judges. This is before all the judges have happened. And this is the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Jabesh Gilead. And the reason that we know that this is at the beginning is because we see the names Eleazar and Phinehas. And Eleazar was the son of Aaron. Phinehas was the son of Eleazar. Those names are mentioned in this chapter. If this is at the end of the book of Judges, like it's actually placed 350 years later, those two guys are long since dead, because that's the son and the grandson of Aaron the priest. And so this story should also be at the beginning. Remember, Judges chapter 1 and 2 is a recap of the close of the book of Joshua. And then we jump to Judges 17 through 21, before we get into all the judges. And so just timeline-wise, that's really important to remember. So the Benjamites, this is where there is a city in Benjamin, a city of Gibeah, where they rape a woman all night and she dies. And then her body is divided and split between the tribes, and they come to war against the Benjamites. This is where they bring the Benjamites to an end. They basically decimate the Benjamites, the rest of the tribes of Israel. They make war with the people of Gibeah, and they destroy all of the people of Benjamin except 600 men of Benjamin. And so Benjamin is basically brought to nothing. The only thing that sustains them is, we come down here into chapter 21, the only thing that sustains the Benjamites is this city, the people of the city of Jabesh Gilead, and their daughters were given to the 600 men so that Jabesh Gilead could be preserved and that the people of Benjamin could be preserved. And we'll find that that will be a big, significant deal. We'll see that again. I'll remind you of that in the book of Samuel. But the Benjamites and the people of Jabesh Gilead will have a relationship back and forth for the rest of the kings. We'll see that several places in 1 Samuel, but I'll remind you of that when we get there. So the next thing that we talked about, episode, what were we on, 66, was Ehud and Deborah. Ehud was the left-handed man who killed King Eglon, shoved the sword into his fat belly, and the belly swallowed up the sword, basically. And then Deborah, this amazing prophetess, she's the second female prophet mentioned in the Bible after Aaron and Moses' sister Miriam back in Exodus. And so Deborah is this prophetess. She is prophesying to the people. She makes her camp between these two very important cities that we'll see actually in the book of Samuel. And she makes her dwelling there, and people come and they seek counsel from her all the time. And so God now is beginning to raise up judges. So the people of the Danites have been wicked. The people of the Benjamites have been wicked. Joshua is dead. The people have forgotten him. And so now God continues to raise up judges to deliver his people from oppression. And Ehud and Deborah are the first two judges really that are mentioned in the book of Judges who will do that. And so we begin to see this timeline where they're oppressed for a period of time, 8 years, and then they had relief for 40 years, and then they're oppressed for 18, and then they have relief again. And so this is where we get the story of Sisera, the general of the army, Sisera, and we get Jael, the woman who crushes his head with the tent spike. And we see Deborah sing this song, this amazing song of what God has done. It's kind of a dark song, I suppose, but these judges are bringing about deliverance for the people of Israel. Now, remember, again, the book of Judges covers about 350 years, and there's going to be times of captivity, times of oppression, and there's going to be times of liberty. So the next big judge that we meet in episode 67 was Gideon. And Gideon is, I don't know, I mean, in terms of stories that are talked about, probably the second most popular judge after Samson. And so Gideon is raised to power. He's the weakest in his clan. He is of the tribe of Benjamin, which is significant because if you're reading Judges 1 through 21, we think that what Gideon's doing here happens before the destruction of the people of Benjamin at the end of the chapter. But remember, those events are switched in the timeline. And so if you're wondering, why are these things out of order? I can't answer that question for you. At some point, these were all on scrolls. Remember that. These are pieces. These are fragments that were put together. And so why they are in the order that they're in, I don't know. The book of Jeremiah, when we get to that, you'll find is a huge mess. And so we'll talk more about the order of the Bible then. But Gideon, he does this amazing thing, and it's Gideon's story is a fantastic story. The angel of the Lord, a reference probably to the pre-incarnate Christ, comes to Gideon, speaks to him, says, I need you to go and defeat these people. And he says, look, I'm the weakest of my family. My family is the smallest in the clan. And the angel of the Lord says, no, I'll be with you. And there are a couple of things that Gideon does. He tests the Lord. He puts out a fleece to see if God really wants him to do it. He says, let the fleece be wet in the morning and the ground be dry. And the fleece is wet the next morning, the ground's dry. And he goes, okay, God, let me test you one more time. Let the fleece be dry and the ground be wet. And that's what happens. And he goes, okay. And then God says, Gideon has his 32,000 soldiers. God says, you've got too many guys with you. Send everybody who's scared home. 22,000, book it. They go home. Now Gideon has 10,000 guys. God goes, man, you still got too many guys. And so Gideon ends up with 300 guys to go against an army of 135,000. And the reason for that is because God wanted to be able to get the glory and the credit for what was happening here. And so the Midianites are defeated. Gideon gets victory, but through God gets victory through Gideon over the Midianites. And it is an incredible, beautiful story. But Gideon makes a mistake. And at the end of Gideon's life, he takes gold earrings from all the men that they've slain, all the Midianites that they've killed. He takes these gold earrings, the treasure the plunder of war, and he takes them and he makes them into a golden scepter, which the people will then idolize and worship. And so Gideon is asked by the people, would you be our king? And Gideon says, no, I won't be your king. And he says, neither will my sons be your king. And then Gideon dies. Now hold that in mind because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. By episode 68, we went to the book of Ruth. It's a short book, 4 chapters. It's an easy read. You could probably read it in 15, 20 minutes tops. And we meet Ruth, who is a Moabite woman. And she is married to the son of Naomi. We call her Naomi. And so she also calls herself Mara. Naomi calls herself Mara because she's bitter. But Ruth is delivered by God from the Moabites. She comes back with Naomi back into the land of the people of God. She meets who will eventually be her husband, this man named Boaz. And what's super cool about Ruth here is that Ruth is mentioned in the lineage of Christ. She is mentioned in Matthew 1. Rahab, who we met in the book of Joshua, married a man named Salmon. They get together, have a son named Boaz, and Boaz marries Ruth, which puts this story of Ruth further into the book of Judges. And then Ruth and Boaz get married. They have a son named Obed, and Obed has a son named Jesse, and Jesse has a son named David. And so that gives us a little bit of the timeline here. So she is mentioned in the lineage of Christ. In Judges 9, the son of Abimelech, this was episode 69, Abimelech is the guy who is one of Gideon's sons. Gideon says, I'm not going to rule over you. My sons aren't going to rule over you. But that just does not satisfy Abimelech. He wants to rule over the people. So he gets the people of Shechem to kind of vote him in to be king. They give him 70 pieces of silver with which he hires some ruthless fellows, and they kill all the rest of the sons of Gideon, save one, Jotham, who will make a prophecy against Gideon and say, look, not against Gideon, but against Abimelech. And they say, if you've done this well, if you've done this in integrity, then let Abimelech rule over you well, let him care for you, may you find rest under his shade. But if you have been wicked, which of course they've been wicked, they've killed the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon. He says, if you've been wicked, let fire come out from Abimelech, and he can destroy you, and you can destroy him. And God sends an evil spirit between the people of Shechem and Abimelech, and they actually end up bringing each other to an end. And our last thing that we talked about this week, episode 70, was a guy named Jephthah. And Jephthah was of Gilead. He was the son of a prostitute. God uses Jephthah to bring victory over the Ammonites. And the Ammonites are saying, hey, you need to give us back our land on the other side of the Jordan. You stole it from us 300 years ago. And then Jephthah, clearly knowing the Jewish history and the history of them coming out of Egypt, recounts for them all this stuff and says, no, look, our God gave us this land. We were just trying to pass through. We were trying to pass through the land to get to our land, and you wouldn't let us, and your ancestors wouldn't let us, and they fought against us, and we brought them to an end. So God gave us this land, and we're not giving it back. You can have what your God gives you, and we'll have what our God gives us. And the king of the Ammonites goes to war against Jephthah and his men, and Jephthah is, of course, victorious. But Jephthah makes a rash vow, and he is sworn to God. He says, whatever comes out of the doors of my house, if you'll give me victory over the Ammonites, whatever comes out of the doors of my house when I get home, I'll offer and sacrifice to you. And Jephthah, out of the doors of his house when he gets home, comes his only child, a daughter, and he ends up sacrificing her to the Lord. And while that is grotesque and offensive, we find still that Jephthah is mentioned in Hebrews 11:32 as a person of faith. And so that's what we covered in the book of Judges so far. We've got a little bit more. We've got one more judge to look at this next week, and I hope that you'll join us then as we talk about Samson, and then we get into some of the kings and Samuel soon next week. So I look forward to joining you then. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.